The Grand Assembly Hall floated in the darkness of space like a jewel made of glass and light. It circled the neutral world of Prime, where no species held power over another. For 500 years, the 12 great races of the galaxy had gathered here to discuss trade, war, and peace. Today, the hall was full. Every seat was taken. Every eye watched the human who stood alone at the center of the room. Ambassador was not a tall man. His hair had turned gray at the temples, and his face carried the lines of someone who had seen too much. He wore the simple dark uniform of the human diplomatic corps, with no medals or ribbons. His hands were steady as he placed a small metal seal on the podium before him. The seal was old. It had been made 300 years ago when humans first joined the Galactic Council. It showed a human hand reaching upward toward the stars. For 3 centuries, that seal had marked every treaty, every agreement, every promise between humanity and the galaxy. Now was giving it back. The council members shifted in their seats. High Counselor Neva of the leaned forward, her silver eyes narrowing. They were tall and graceful, with skin like pale marble. They had ruled the council for 200 years, and Neva was the proudest of them all. Ambassador, she said, her voice cold and smooth. You called for this session. The council has granted you time to speak. What do you want? Looked at her, he looked at all of them, with their 4 arms and cruel smiles. They whose hive mind spoke through a single body. The small and ancient, watching everything with careful eyes. 11 species, 11 votes, 11 choices that had brought humanity to this moment. I want nothing, said. His voice was calm. I am here to inform the council that humanity is leaving. For a moment there was silence. Then Ambassador of the laughed. It was an ugly sound like rocks grinding together. Leaving, said. Where will you go, human? You live scattered across our stations and our planets. You depend on us. Did not answer, he simply waited. Stood behind him a young woman with sharp eyes and steady hands. She held a recording device, capturing every word, every face, every moment. She had served for 10 years and she had never seen him like this. There was no anger in him, no fear, only a deep, quiet sadness that seemed to fill the entire room. High Counselor Neva waved her hand dismissively. This is theatrical nonsense. Humanity has been part of the council for 300 years. You cannot simply leave. We can, said, and we will. He touched the seal on the podium. 300 years ago our ancestors lost Earth. A dying star, an impossible choice, a desperate flight into the unknown. We arrived in this galaxy as refugees with nothing but our ships and our hope. The council took us in. We were grateful. We showed our gratitude through service. His voice grew softer, but somehow it carried to every corner of the hall. We fought your wars. When the conflict threatened to destroy half the galaxy, human soldiers died by the millions to enforce the peace. When the hives fell to the crystal plague, human doctors worked for 30 years to find a cure. When your trade routes became too dangerous, human ships patrolled them for free. When your children needed teachers, your stations needed engineers, your sick needed healers, humans answered. Always we answered. Elder of the lowered her head. She was small and old, with skin like cracked leather and eyes that had seen 1,000 years. She was the only one who did not look away from. 2 years ago, continued, the pale drift came to our colonies, a disease unlike anything we had seen. It spread through 17 human worlds in 8 months. 2 billion of our people died. 2 billion. His voice did not break. His hands did not shake, but saw the tears gathering in his eyes, and she felt her own throat tighten. We asked the council for help. We begged. We reminded you of every war we fought, every plague we cured, every debt you owed us. We asked for medicine, for ships, for anything you could spare. He looked at each of them in turn. The council voted. 11-1, you us. You called it an internal species matter. You said you could not interfere. You watched 2 billion humans die and you did nothing. Ambassador shifted uncomfortably. High Counselor Neva's face was like stone. "That is in the past," Neva said. "The plague has ended, your people survived. There is no need for this drama." "You are right," said. "The plague ended because our doctors found a cure without your help. Our people survived because we saved ourselves. And you are right that there is no need for drama. That is why I am not here to accuse you. I am not here to demand justice. I am simply here to say goodbye." He picked up the seal and held it out. "We wish you well, goodbye." No one moved to take it. After a long moment, set it down on the podium and turned to leave. Fell into step beside him, her recording device still running. "Ambassador," Neva called after him. "This is a bluff. You have nowhere to go. You will return within the month begging for readmission." Did not stop. He did not turn around. He simply walked through the great doors of the assembly hall, and they closed behind him with a soft sound that seemed to echo forever. In the hall, the council members looked at each other. "Humans," said with a snort, "always so emotional. They will come back, they always do." Elder said nothing. She looked at the seal sitting alone on the podium, and she felt something cold settle in her chest. She had voted to help the humans. She had been the only one. Now she was afraid. She understood something the others did not. Within a week, the news spread across the galaxy. Every human, all 900 million of them, spread across 1,000 worlds and 10,000 stations, began to pack. They canceled contracts. They sold property. They said goodbye to neighbors and friends. They did not argue. They did not protest. They simply smiled, shook hands, and prepared to leave. The council watched with growing confusion. They had expected anger. They had expected demands. They had expected negotiations. Instead, they got silence. And in that silence, something began to break, something that would never be whole again. Ambassador stood on the observation deck of his ship as it pulled away from Prime. Behind him, the Grand Assembly Hall grew smaller and smaller until it was just another point of light among the stars. Stood beside him. "Sir," she said quietly, "do you think they understand? Watch the stars for a long time." "No," he said finally, "not yet, but they will. They will understand when they reach for us and find us gone. They will understand when the silence we leave behind becomes louder than any words we could have spoken." He turned away from the window. "Come, our people are waiting. It is time to go home." And somewhere in the great empty dark, 900 million humans began their journey into the unknown, leaving behind a galaxy that had never deserved them. The council would learn. In time, they would all learn. But by then, it would be far too late. The humans left the way they had always lived among the stars, quietly, carefully, with kindness that cut deeper than any blade. Doctor had worked at the Central Medical Station for 23 years. She had healed more than she could count. She had trained doctors from 6 different species. She had saved lives that no one else could save, working through nights and days until her hands shook from exhaustion. Now she stood in the surgery room for the last time. The patient on the table was a child, and girl no more than 10 years old with skin like fresh snow and eyes closed in sleep. A tumor had grown in her brain, wrapped around the parts that let her see and speak. No doctor would touch it. The risk was too great. But had steady hands and 30 years of experience. She had operated on cases like this before. The surgery took 8 hours. When it was over, the child would live. She would see. She would speak. She would grow up and never know the name of the human who had saved her. Removed her gloves and looked at her assistant, a young doctor named who had studied under her for 5 years. "The follow-up care is in the files," said. "Check her every 6 hours for the first 2 days. Watch for swelling. If her temperature rises, use the medication I marked in blue." Nodded, but his hands were trembling. "Doctor, please stay. We need you. I am not ready to do this alone." Put her hand on his shoulder. She smiled, but her eyes were tired and sad. "You are ready," she said. "I have taught you everything I know. Trust yourself. You will be a fine doctor." She took off her medical coat and folded it neatly. Then she walked out of the surgery room, out of the station, and onto the transport ship that would carry her away forever. Stood alone in the empty room, surrounded by machines he barely understood and responsibilities he was not sure he could carry. On a dozen stations across Council space, the same scene played out. Human engineers finished their final repairs and handed over maintenance manuals that no one had bothered to read. Human teachers gave their last lessons and wished their students well. Human soldiers completed their final patrols and turned in their weapons. Chief Engineer had spent 15 years keeping Station 7 alive. The station was old, built by the 2 centuries ago, and its fusion cores were unstable. Only understood how to keep them balanced. Only knew which pipes would burst if the pressure got too high, which circuits would fail if the temperature dropped too low. He spent his last week writing everything down. Every trick, every shortcut, every piece of knowledge he had gained through years of trial and error. He filled 300 pages with notes and diagrams. Then he handed the manual to his replacement, a young engineer named who had never worked on fusion cores before. "Read this," said. "Study it. If you have questions, ask them now because I will not be here to answer them later." Looked at the manual like it was written in a foreign language. "This is too much. I cannot learn all of this." "Then learn what you can," said, "and pray that it is enough." He boarded his transport that evening. As the ship pulled away from the station, he looked back at 7 glowing in the darkness. He wondered how long it would last without him. Not long, he thought, not long at all. Captain stood on the bridge of the patrol vessel Horizon's Edge and watched the final refugee convoy form up around him. 30 transport ships, carrying the last 50,000 humans from the outer territories. Families with children, elderly couples who had lived on these stations for generations, young people who had never seen another human world. They were all leaving now, heading for the far reaches where humanity was building something new. "Captain," his first officer said, "sensors are picking up vessels approaching from the North Quadrant, 6 ships. They are moving to intercept the convoy." Felt something cold settle in his stomach. They had always hated humans. They had voted loudest against helping during the Pale Drift, and now, with humanity leaving, some of them saw an opportunity. Easy prey, they thought. Refugees without protection. Ships full of valuable cargo and desperate people. They were wrong. "All hands to battle stations," said calmly. "Weapons hot, shields to maximum." The Horizon's Edge was not a warship. It was a patrol vessel designed for long journeys and light combat, but had commanded it for 12 years, and his crew knew their business. The ships came fast, weapons charging. Their leader broadcast a message, demanding that the convoy surrender its cargo and submit to inspection. Did not respond. He simply waited until they were close enough, and then he gave the order. The battle lasted 11 minutes. When it was over, 5 ships were burning wreckage, and the 6th was drifting dead in space. Ordered his crew to rescue the survivors. 43 pulled from the wreckage and placed in the brig. Then he sent one of them back in a life pod, with a message for the fleet. "We are leaving, do not follow." The convoy continued its journey, without further interference. Across the galaxy, the Council watched and waited. They expected the humans to change their minds. They expected negotiations. They expected begging. Instead, they got nothing. The humans paid their final debts. They fulfilled their contracts to the last day. They returned borrowed equipment and settled outstanding balances. They did everything properly, legally, perfectly. And then they left. Medical stations began reporting shortages within the first month. Human doctors had made up less than 10% of the total medical staff, but they had handled over 40% of the difficult cases. Now, Patients who needed specialized surgery had no one to operate on them. Diseases that human researchers had been studying went untreated. 3 major infrastructure projects stopped completely. The humans had been the primary engineers, and no one else knew how to continue their work. On Station Meridian, a new water recycling system sat half-built, its plans incomprehensible to the workers left behind. The hive lost its entire diplomatic translation corps in a single day. Humans had served as neutral translators for decades, trusted by all sides because they had no stake in politics. Without them, 3 rival hives immediately accused each other of bad faith negotiations. Old tensions flared into new conflicts. Economists noticed troubling patterns in the trade data. Human merchant ships had carried a surprising amount of cargo between Council worlds. Without them, shipping costs began to rise. Delivery times grew longer. Shortages appeared in markets that had never known scarcity. High Counselor Neva dismissed the concerns. "Temporary adjustments," she said. "The other species will adapt. We do not need humans." But Elder of the watched the reports with growing fear. She saw what others refused to see. The humans had not been guests in the Council's house. They had been the ones holding the house together. And now the house was beginning to fall. On the last day of the Exodus, Ambassador stood on the deck of the final transport leaving Council space. Behind him, 1,000 stars glittered in the darkness, each one home to stations and worlds that humans had helped build. Stood beside him, as she always did. "It is done," she said quietly. "The last of our people have crossed the border. We are gone." Nodded, he felt no triumph, no satisfaction, only a deep, heavy sadness that pressed against his chest like a stone. "They still do not understand," he said. "They think we will come back. They think this is temporary." "Will we come back?" asked. Was silent for a long time. He thought about the 2 billion dead. He thought about the Council's vote. He thought about 300 years of service, repaid with silence. "No," he said finally. "Some doors once closed stay closed forever. They made their choice. Now they will live with it." The transport crossed into human space, and the border sealed behind them. In the Council's great halls, the celebration continued. The troublesome humans were gone. The galaxy could finally move forward without their constant interference. But in the shadows, in the quiet places where no one was watching, the first cracks were already forming. And soon, very soon, the whole galaxy would learn what it truly meant to be alone. 6 months after the last human ship crossed the border, the Council called an emergency session. The great hall that had once echoed with confident laughter was now filled with angry voices and frightened faces. High Counselor Neva stood at her podium, her silver skin pale with stress, her eyes darting from one delegate to another. The reports in front of her were bad, worse than bad. They were catastrophic. "The corridor has fallen," Ambassador of the announced, his 4 arms crossed over his chest. His voice was rough with barely controlled fury. "Pirate fleets have seized control of the primary trade route. 18 merchant convoys destroyed in the last month alone." The corridor had been the safest passage in the galaxy for 200 years. Ships traveled through it without fear, knowing that human patrol vessels watched over every light year. The humans had asked for nothing in return. They had simply done it because it needed to be done. Counselor had once mocked this practice. He had called it typical human desperation for approval. He had said the humans were trying too hard to make themselves useful, to prove their worth to species that did not need them. Naus was starving. The food shipments that once flowed freely through the corridor had stopped. His people were dying, and there was nothing he could do. "Send your own ships to patrol the corridor," Neva said impatiently. "The Council has the largest fleet in the galaxy." "Our ships are needed elsewhere," the delegate replied. The spoke through a single body, but 1,000 minds whispered behind its words. "3 of our hives are at war. Without human translators, we cannot negotiate peace. We need every vessel to protect our own borders. Then hire mercenaries, Neva said. With what money? Demanded. Our economy is collapsing. Trade has fallen 60% since the humans left. We cannot afford mercenaries. The arguments continued for hours. Each species blamed another. Each delegate demanded that someone else solve the problem. No one wanted to admit the truth that hung over them all like a shadow. They needed the humans, and the humans were gone. On the greatest medical research center in the galaxy stood half empty. For 100 years, human scientists had worked alongside doctors, pushing the boundaries of medicine further than any species could reach alone. They had cured diseases that had plagued the galaxy for. They had developed treatments that saved billions of lives. But the humans had taken their knowledge with them when they left. High Counselor Neva stormed into the research center, demanding answers. She found the director sitting alone in his office, staring at rows of empty desks. "Where is the research?" Neva demanded. "The cure for the crimson fever, the treatment for neural decay, where is it?" The director looked up at her with hollow eyes. "Gone," he said. "The humans created it, they took it with them." "That research was conducted in facilities," Neva said. "It belongs to us." "No," the director shook his head slowly. "The research was conducted by human minds. We provided the building. They provided the knowledge. We have no right to what they created. And even if we did, we cannot recreate it. We do not understand how they did it. We never bothered to learn." Neva wanted to scream. She wanted to break something. But deep down, in a place she did not want to acknowledge, she knew the director was right. The humans had always been there, quiet and helpful, solving problems that no one else could solve. They had taken them for granted. They had assumed the humans would always be there. Now they were learning how wrong they had been. On the frontier world of 3, a woman named tended her garden in the early morning light. She was one of the few humans who had stayed behind, married to a named Tal, with children who had never known Earth or the human colonies. She had chosen to stay because this world was her home. Her children had been born here. Her life was here. But every day she watched her neighbors struggle with problems that humans had once solved without thinking. Tal found her among the flowers, her hands deep in the soil, her face troubled. "The water recyclers failed again," he said, sitting down beside her. "Third time this month. Young tried to fix them, but he does not know how. None of us do." Sighed, she had designed those recyclers herself 15 years ago. She had shown how to maintain them a dozen times, but had never really listened. None of them had. They had assumed would always be there to fix things. "I will look at them later," she said quietly. Tal was silent for a moment. Then he asked the question that had been bothering him for months. "Why did your people leave the way they did? No fighting, no demands, you just walked away. I do not understand." Pulled her hands from the soil and looked at her husband. She loved him. She loved this world. But there was a pain in her heart that never quite went away. "Because you cannot force someone to value you," she said. "For 300 years we gave everything we had to the council. We fought. We healed. We built. We asked for nothing in return except to be treated as equals, as partners, as friends." She looked up at the sky, where distant stars burned cold and bright. "When the pale drift came, we asked for help. Just once in 300 years we asked, and the council said no, 11 votes to 1. They watched us die and did nothing." Tal lowered his head. He had heard this before, but hearing it never got easier. "We could have stayed and fought," continued. "We could have demanded justice, but what would that have changed? You cannot make someone care about you. You cannot force respect. So we stopped trying. We simply accepted that we were alone and we left." "But you stayed," Tal said. "You are still here." Smiled sadly. "I stayed because I love you, because my children are here, because this is my home. But I understand why the others left. Sometimes the kindest thing you can do for yourself is walk away from people who do not see your worth. Across the galaxy, the consequences continued to spread. The pale drift disease reappeared on 3 council worlds. Human doctors had developed the cure, but they had taken it with them. Council scientists tried to recreate the treatment, but they did not understand the complex biology that humans had spent years studying. Thousands died while researchers scrambled to catch up. Ambassador of the was quietly recalled to his. The economy, dependent on trade routes that humans had protected, was collapsing. Food shortages led to riots. Riots led to military crackdowns. Military crackdowns led to civil unrest. Had been one of the loudest voices against helping the humans during the Pale Drift. Now he sat in his empty office, watching his world fall apart, wondering if this was what justice felt like. Elder of the traveled from world to world trying to hold things together. She was old and tired, but she could not rest. She had been the only one to vote for helping the humans. She had tried to warn the council. No one had listened. Now she saw the consequences everywhere she looked. Empty medical beds, starving colonies, wars that no one could stop, problems that no one could solve. She thought about Ambassador, standing alone in the Great Hall, holding out the seal that humanity had carried for 300 years. She remembered his words, spoken without anger, without hatred, without anything but quiet, terrible sadness. "We wish you well, goodbye." At the time, she had thought it was the end of something. Now she understood it was just the beginning. The beginning of a lesson the galaxy would never forget. In the human colonies of the far reaches, life went on. Ships were built. Cities rose. Children were born. For the first time in 300 years, humans were building something that was truly their own. They heard the news from Council Space. They knew about the collapsing trade routes and the spreading diseases and the wars that no one could stop. Some of them felt sad. Some felt vindicated. Most felt nothing at all. The Council had made its choice. The humans had made theirs. There was nothing more to say. 1 year after the humans left, the war began over a mining dispute on a small moon called 4. The dispute was simple. Both species claimed the moon. Both species wanted its minerals. 100 years ago, a human diplomat would have sat both sides down, listened to their arguments, and found a solution that satisfied everyone. Humans were good at that. They had no stake in the outcome, no ancient grudges, no hidden agendas. They simply wanted peace. But there were no human diplomats anymore. The sent warships, the sent soldiers. Within a week, 4 was burning. Within a month, the war had spread to 3 other systems. Within 6 months, 4 more species had been drawn into the conflict, old alliances activating, old hatreds flaring back to life. The Galactic Council met to discuss the crisis. They debated for 17 days. They argued about blame. They pointed fingers. They demanded that other species sacrifice while protecting their own interests. In the end, they accomplished nothing. The Council had been designed for consensus. Every major decision required agreement from at least 8 of the 12 species. But without humans to mediate, to find common ground, to speak the words that no one else was willing to say, consensus became impossible. The war continued to spread. Engineer sat in her small apartment on New Haven, a human colony in the far reaches, and read the messages on her screen. They were from her former colleagues on Station 7, and engineers she had worked with for years. The messages were desperate. "The fusion cores are destabilizing. We have followed the manual, but something is wrong. The temperature keeps rising. Please, we need your help. 40,000 people live on this station. Without your guidance, they will all die." Stared at the screen for a long time. She remembered Station 7. She remembered the long nights spent keeping those old fusion cores running. She remembered Chief Engineer who had trained her, who had taught her everything she knew about keeping ancient systems alive. Was gone now. He had died 6 months after the Exodus, worn out by decades of work that no one had appreciated. His last words had been about 7. "Someone should check on that station," he had said. "Those cores were always temperamental. Without proper care, they will fail." Wanted to help. Part of her still cared about the people on that station, even the ones who had looked down on her, who had called humans useful servants when they thought she could not hear. But it was not her decision to make. She forwarded the messages to the Human Governing Assembly and waited. The assembly met 3 days later. President called the session to order and presented the request from Station 7. The debate that followed was long and painful. "We should help them," Representative argued. "They are innocent people. They did not vote against us during the Pale Drift. They are not responsible for the Council's choices." "Innocent?" Representative Bora replied, her voice sharp with old pain. "They lived in comfort while our people died. They said nothing when the Council refused us aid. Their silence was a choice, and choices have consequences. If we help them, we send a message that we will always come back," Admiral said. He was old now, his hair white, his face lined with scars from a lifetime of service. "We will become what we were before, tools to be used, servants to be discarded. We cannot allow that." "And if we do nothing, 40,000 people will die," said. 2 billion of our people died," replied quietly. "And the galaxy watched. They are not our enemies, Representative, but they are no longer our responsibility. We gave them everything. They gave us silence when we screamed. Let them learn what silence truly costs." The vote was close, closer than anyone expected, but in the end the assembly decided. The answer was no. Received the decision that evening. She sat alone in her apartment looking at the messages from 7, and she wept. Not for the station, not for the people who would die. She wept for herself, for the part of her that still wanted to help, that still believed in kindness even when kindness was not returned. 3 weeks later, Station 7 exploded. The fusion cores overheated just as had predicted. The containment failed. The explosion vaporized the station and everyone on it. 40,000 souls gone in an instant. The news spread across Council space like wildfire. Some blamed the humans for refusing to help. Some blamed them for building a faulty station. Some blamed the engineers who had failed to maintain it. No one blamed the Council for driving the humans away in the first place. Elder heard the news on the transport ship carrying her to the human border. She had spent months arranging this journey, calling in favors, bending rules, doing everything she could to reach the people she had failed. She was the first Council member to enter human space since the Exodus. The human patrol ships escorted her transport to New Haven, where she was taken to a small government building and asked to wait. She sat in a plain room with plain chairs and plain walls, and she felt the weight of every year she had lived pressing down on her. A door opened. President entered. Was younger than had expected. She had dark hair streaked with gray and eyes that seemed to see everything. She moved with quiet confidence, taking a seat across from without ceremony or pretense. Elder said, "You have come a long way." "I have," replied. "I have come to apologize." "On behalf of the Council." "No," shook her head slowly. "The Council did not send me. They do not know I am here. I have come to apologize for myself, for the vote I could not change, for the friends I could not save, for 300 years of taking without giving." Was silent for a long moment. Then she stood and walked to a small cabinet in the corner of the room. She took out a teapot and 2 cups, set them on the table, and poured. "Tea," she said simply. "A human custom. We drink it when we need to slow down, when we need to think." Wrapped her old hands around the warm cup and breathed in the steam. It smelled like flowers and something else, something she could not name. "I voted to help you," said. "During the Pale Drift, I was the only one." "I know," replied. "We remember. That is why you are sitting here drinking tea instead of sitting in a cell waiting for deportation. Looked down at her cup. What would it take for your people to return? What do you want from us? The question hung in the air. Took a slow sip of her tea before answering. You ask what we want, she said, but you are asking the wrong question. We do not want anything from you, Elder. That is the point. For 300 years we wanted acceptance. We wanted respect. We wanted to be valued. And for 300 years we received none of those things, so we stopped wanting. She set down her cup. We were your tools, Elder. Your soldiers, your doctors, your builders, your conscience. You used us until we were worn, then discarded us when we needed mending. We do not hate you, but we will never again be what we were. Some doors, once closed, do not reopen. Felt tears running down her old face. She had known, deep down, that this would be the answer, but hearing it spoken aloud was harder than she had imagined. Then why did you see me? She asked. Why let me come all this way? Smiled sadly. Because you were the only one who voted for us, because kindness should be acknowledged even when it is not enough, and because I wanted you to understand so that you could tell the others. Tell them what? Tell them that we are not coming back. Tell them that the galaxy they built on our backs will have to learn to stand on its own. Tell them that we are finally free. Nodded slowly. She understood now. She understood everything. Thank you, she said quietly, for the tea, for the truth, for letting an old woman say goodbye. Reached across the table and took's wrinkled hand in her own. Goodbye, Elder. I hope your people find peace. I truly do. Left human space the next day. She carried no treaties, no promises, no hope of reconciliation. She carried only a message. A message that would break the galaxy's heart. But first, she would have to watch it burn. 18 months after the humans left, the Galactic Council held its final session. The great hall that had once sparkled with light and pride was dark now. Half the seats were empty. The delegations that remained were thin and tired, their fine robes stained with the dust of worlds that were burning. High Counselor Neva stood at her podium, but she was no longer the proud leader who had dismissed Ambassador with a wave of her hand. Her silver skin had turned gray with stress. Her eyes, once bright and confident, were hollow and haunted. The war has spread to 9 systems, she read from a report she could barely hold steady. Casualties now exceed 200 million. The plague has appeared on 6 worlds. 3 member species have withdrawn from the Council. Food shortages have been reported on 47 planets. She stopped reading. There was no point. Everyone in the room knew how bad things were. They had lived it. They were still living it. The Council can no longer function, Neva said, her voice cracking. We cannot maintain peace. We cannot protect trade. We cannot cure disease. We cannot do anything that we were created to do. She looked around the room at the faces of delegates who had once called themselves the Masters of the Galaxy. I am dissolving the Galactic Council, she said, effective immediately. There was no protest, no argument, no one had the strength to fight anymore. The delegates filed out of the hall in silence. Some returned to worlds that were already lost. Some returned to civil wars they could not stop. Some simply disappeared into the darkness between the stars, refugees in a galaxy that had no refuge left. Elder watched them go. She had returned from human space 3 months ago, carrying President's message. She had delivered it to the Council. They had not believed her. The humans will come back, they had said. They have to. They cannot survive without us. But the humans were surviving. They were thriving. Reports from the far reaches spoke of new cities rising, new ships being built, new hope spreading through colonies that had never known hope before. The humans were not coming back, and the galaxy was paying the price. In the weeks that followed, the survivors tried to rebuild. 7 species formed the new compact, a desperate alliance without the structure or wisdom to hold itself together. They argued about leadership. They fought over resources. They blamed each other for problems they had all helped create. 3 species descended into civil war. Their governments collapsed. Their worlds burned. Billions died in conflicts that humans had once prevented with nothing more than words and patience. The fell last. Their great cities, built on the backs of conquered peoples, crumbled under the weight of their own arrogance. The planet's atmosphere turned toxic from industrial collapse. The few survivors fled into space, becoming the refugees they had once despised. Captain heard about it on the human border. He was still commanding the horizon's edge, still patrolling the line between human space and the chaos beyond. His hair had gone gray in the past year, and his crew had been reduced to a skeleton team, but he refused to retire. "Sir," his first officer reported one morning, "sensors have detected a convoy approaching the border. Vessels, civilian, they are requesting asylum." Looked at the sensor display. 12 ships packed with refugees. Men, women, children, survivors of a world that had tried to destroy humanity more than once. "Orders from command are clear," the first officer said. "No non-humans are to cross the border. We are to turn them away." Was silent for a long moment. He thought about the who had attacked his convoy during the Exodus. He thought about Ambassador, who had laughed when announced humanity's departure. He thought about all the years humans had served the Council, only to be abandoned when they needed help. Then he thought about the children in those ships, the families who had done nothing wrong, the innocent people who were going to die if he turned them away. "Open a channel to the convoy," he said. "Sir, orders are." "I know what the orders are," interrupted. "Open the channel." The screen flickered to life. A female appeared, her 4 arms wrapped around 2 small children. Her eyes were wide with fear and exhaustion. "Please," she said, "we have nowhere else to go. Our world is gone. Our fleet is destroyed. We have nothing. We are asking for mercy." Looked at her. He saw not an enemy, but a mother trying to protect her children. He saw not but a living being in desperate need. "This is Captain of the Horizon's Edge," he said. "I am transmitting coordinates to a neutral station in the buffer zone. It is not human space, but you will be safe there. We will provide food and medical supplies. You will not be harmed." The female stared at him in disbelief. "Why? After everything our people did to yours, why would you help us?" Thought about the question. He thought about standing alone in the council chamber, holding out a seal that no one wanted. He thought about Doctor saving a child before walking away forever. He thought about his own people, who had given and given and given until there was nothing left. "Because we are human," he said, "and that is what humans do, even when no one else does it for us." He ended the transmission and turned to his crew. "Escort them to the buffer station. Make sure they have what they need, then return to patrol." "Sir, you will face a tribunal for this," the first officer said quietly. "You violated direct orders." "I know," replied, "but some orders are worth violating." The tribunal was held 3 weeks later, stood before a panel of admirals and judges accused of disobeying a lawful command. The evidence was clear. The punishment could be severe. But when the time came for the panel to deliver its verdict, something unexpected happened. Admiral, the oldest member of the panel, stood up slowly. His white hair caught the light, and his face was unreadable. "Captain," he said, "you violated orders. You gave aid and comfort to a species that has been hostile to humanity for centuries. You risked your career and your freedom for people who did nothing to deserve your mercy." He paused. "In doing so, you reminded us of something we had forgotten. We left the council because they could not see our worth. We left because they took us for granted. We left because we finally learned to love ourselves. But loving ourselves does not mean becoming what they were. It does not mean closing our hearts to all compassion. It means choosing when and how to give, not refusing to give at all." Looked at the other panel members, then back at Compassion is human. We do not abandon it because others abandoned us. This tribunal finds you not guilty." Saluted, there were tears in his eyes, but he did not let them fall. Across human space, the news spread. The story of the refugees became a symbol of something larger. Humanity had not left the galaxy because they hated it. They had left because they needed to heal. They had left because they needed to learn who they were without the burden of others' expectations. And now, slowly, they were beginning to discover the answer. On New Horizon, the capital world of the human colonies, something remarkable was happening. For the first time in a century, the birth rate was rising. Children were being born into a world that belonged to them. Families were growing. Hope was spreading. President watched the reports with a mixture of pride and sorrow. Her people were thriving. They were building something beautiful, but she could not forget the price they had paid to get here. 2 billion dead in the pale drift. 300 years of service, unappreciated and unremembered. A galaxy that had used them and discarded them like broken tools. She thought about Elder, the old who had come so far to apologize for sins that were not entirely her own. She thought about the words she had spoken to that tired, sad creature. Some doors once closed do not reopen. It was true. The door to the past was closed forever, but perhaps someday a new door might open, not to the old relationship built on servitude and silence, but to something different, something built on mutual respect and genuine friendship. Not today, not tomorrow, perhaps not for generations. But someday. Turned away from the window and returned to her work. There was a colony to build, a people to guide, a future to create. The past was gone, the present was here, and the future, for the first time in 300 years, belonged entirely to humanity. Whatever came next, they would face it on their own terms. And they would never, ever forget what it had cost them to get here.